Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back. We're going to have a discussion about political commentators and the role that non-traditional media is playing in political discussions right now, especially with younger voters. For this conversation, we've got Stephen Bonnell, who is a social media political commentator. Welcome, Stephen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And also Brad Polumbo, who is also another social media political commentator. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks.
Now, I'd like you both, starting with you, Brad, to explain your programs, your politics, and the platforms that you're on.
Yeah, I'm the host of the Brad versus Everyone podcast, primarily on YouTube, but also on all audio platforms, where I take on kind of the craziest and most extreme takes from across our politics, our media, and the internet from an independent, right of center political perspective. And it's a weird moment to be kind of on the center right politically if you're not fully on board the MAGA train, but you also really reject a lot of modern liberalism and the state of the Democratic Party. But something about that independent perspective has resonated with people, at least somewhat, especially on YouTube, where I post videos every single day, basically, and focus on that platform primarily.
And Stephen, what about you?
Hey, I have a YouTube channel. It's just called Destiny. I don't really have a formal name for the show. I kind of cover politics from a center left to far leftish perspective. My politics are pretty moderate, but my messaging is a little bit extreme sometimes. My background is in kind of like internet video games where everybody's a bit more, I guess I would say, aggressively coded, I guess, on how they communicate with each other. So I do a ton of kind of contemporary political analysis, sometimes historical political analysis, combined with a little bit of philosophy or science or whatever the topics of the day are. One of the advantages of doing the program live on YouTube is I can interact with my audience in real time, and there's just a ton of feedback. And as a result, the, I guess, programming can be pretty dynamic.
Now, for those in our audience who may not be consuming their news or political commentary online on these streaming platforms like YouTube or Twitch, can you talk about where you sit specifically in the ecosystem there and what the environment is like for news on these platforms? Brad, why don't you go first?
Yeah, well, I think on most social media platforms and most content platforms, you have a lot of voices that are fully on Team Red or a lot of voices that are fully on Team Blue. So you will have very huge YouTube accounts that are reliably kind of spinning a MAGA narrative, right? A pro-Trump narrative, covering things from a pro-Trump perspective. And then you'll have a lot of kind of bog standard resistance, liberal type content creators that will get millions and millions of views, just criticizing Trump, covering what's going on from a very solidly Team Blue perspective. Then there's a handful of people somewhere in the middle, which is where I would categorize myself, though I'm definitely right of center in my politics and in my bias. But there is a market for that. It's just perhaps harder to succeed and harder to kind of stand out in the tribalistic and partisan nature of political conversations today. That's where I'd place myself, but most of the conversations do tend to be dominated, not unlike traditional media, by reliable partisans on either side.
And Stephen, are you seeing any change in the role that political commentators like yourself are playing in the broader media ecosystem in this current environment?
Unfortunately, yes, I would say that alternative media is playing a larger and larger role, and I think that we've kind of left that era of caring at all about any kind of factual reporting or any kind of understanding of an issue, and now it just seems like it's pure rhetoric and it's kind of pure partisan talking points where everybody just kind of tunes into their, I guess, alternative media personality that tells them the things that they want to hear, regardless of whether or not they're divorced from reality. And yeah, I feel like alternative media, unfortunately, has played a really negative role in moving us in that divorced from reality direction.
Now, Stephen, can you talk a little bit about your audience? Who's tuning in to you and anything we know about their demographics?
Yeah, I would say the demographics of my audience probably tend to skew a lot younger than traditional media, whereas I think Fox and CNN and MSNBC all, I want to say that the average age is, I think, like in the 70s. I think it's quite older, not old, just older. I would say online, the demographics skew much younger. And then in my community, especially with the background in gaming and everything, my audience skews probably on average, I think around like 27 to 28 years old, maybe a tad younger, depending on what exactly I'm talking about. They tend to be probably a bit more affluent, probably a bit whiter, a bit more international maybe than people that would be watching cable, Fox, or MSNBC.
What about your audience, Brad?
Yeah, I think the plurality of my audience is in that like 18 to 35 range. It's about even gender split, which actually somewhat surprised me when I first learned that. So a lot of women like to tune in to me as well, which is perhaps a little bit different than a lot of male political commentators in the online space. But it's a lot of people who are disaffected from one side or the other's reliable narrative and are looking for something different and feel often kind of disillusioned with how delusional and extreme our politics are these days.
Now then, given that you're independent content creators, how do you decide what stories to cover? And are there particular stories that you feel you're better positioned to cover than maybe more traditional media outlets? Stephen, go ahead.
There's always kind of a buzz on social media and on really all the mainstream media channels in terms of what's going on for the day. Thankfully, it's not really hard to figure out what you need to talk about since we have a live streamer president who is going live sometimes 2 or 3 times a day to talk about whatever his current agenda is. So if there's a new executive order being signed, if there's a new massive vehicle being accepted, if there's a new, trade deal being spoken about, usually it's pretty easy to figure out what you want to cover. Like the entire media is kind of focusing on whatever's going on for the day. And you could look at social media or just look at the audience. They'll be talking about things and you can get feedback from what people want to hear about there. The second part of that question, what are we best primed to cover? I guess, I mean, I would argue things that I've done individual research or reading into are things that I'm probably the best primed to cover. But I think that when it comes to alternative media, I think that people just want to hear you cover whatever are the important stories of the day, regardless of whether or not you know what you're talking about, for better or for worse. And I think that a lot of the alternative media sphere kind of plays into that. Like the joke, and I'm sure Brad's made it, maybe you guys here have made it, that everybody becomes an expert on whatever the current geopolitical or financial issue or science-based issue is of the day. Everybody suddenly has a strong take on it.
And Brad, what's your process?
Yeah, well, I'm a little different because I'm only doing about 30 minutes of content a day. So I have to pick and choose what do I cover and what do I not. And I try to go for a mix of what I think will be entertaining to people, because if we're being honest, a lot of new media is entertainment essentially, but also what will have some sort of broader informative value or connect to some broader lesson. And then in terms of what I think I'm well positioned to cover, well, there's entire ecosystems and entire storylines that are unplaying with millions and millions of people tuning into them that mainstream media is not even really attuned to. I mean, there was just a huge scandal on TikTok where an anti-Trump resistance store imploded over alleged microaggressions. This is something that millions and millions and millions of people were talking about online, but barely even got noticed or covered at all in traditional media because they're just not plugged into those spaces. And as somebody on the younger side, as somebody who's chronically online, I can be plugged into those. So I think I'm well positioned to cover those. My background's also in traditional economics. I was a political reporter for several years, so I can cover all of that stuff. And then I tend to try to avoid talking about topics where I truly don't know that much. So when we're talking about foreign affairs or geopolitics, I kind of lean out and focus more domestically, where I do have years as a traditional, media analyst and writer, and did actually study those topics.
Well, if our audience has questions for either of our guests, you can call in. Democrats at 202-748-8000, Republicans at 202-748-8001, Independents at 202-748-8002. And because our guests have special expertise reaching younger audience, we have a special line for folks under 35. If you're under 35, you can call in at 202-748-8003. Stephen, I'd like to go back to you. There's been so much, you brought this up yourself, so much polarization and political discourse online with this idea of, everybody finding their own niche. How do you balance the need for sort of viewer engagement with the need for, and being right with sort of bridge building and maybe acknowledging points from other perspectives?
That's a funnier question than you realize for me.
Okay.
One of my big complaints about alternative media is I really, truly do feel like it is the worst of the worst when it comes to actual media coverage. And in terms of actually finding independent points of view where people are doing research, where people have some political or philosophical foundation of which they can filter news through and then kind of give you their individual take. I feel like that is incredibly rare. I try to do that on my program, but I feel like most people are typically just going to give you whatever the current thoughts of the day are. If I tune into like a progressive YouTube channel, I'm going to hear what progressives think about an issue. I'm probably not going to hear anything that's going to surprise me. If I tune into a conservative channel, except for the exceedingly rare never Trump conservatives or, not Trump conservatives, I'm going to hear the Trump talking points of the day. I would say that alternative media overwhelmingly coalesces around whatever the talking points are for their individual factions. That's just how alternative media works right now, unfortunately.
A question we received on X from Michael Thornton. Can you address audience capture of independent media? Brad, do you want to attempt that one?
Well, yeah, I think to understand that, all you have to do is watch one of these influencer briefings that the Trump administration has hosted with all these new media personalities, where they just basically ask them, "Oh, Mrs. Press Secretary, Madam Press Secretary, why are you so amazing and wonderful?" Because they've decided to just become kind of, the traditional media, I do believe, has a strong liberal and democratic bias, while new media was supposed to be independent and different. But it's very easy to fall into those incentives, to want, to just pander to a certain audience that wants to hear a certain thing these days, to want access and connection with powerful people. And I think a lot of new media really has become kind of a PR arm for the Republican Party when we're talking about right-wing new media. And it's just unfortunately kind of rare to actually have critical and independent perspectives. They definitely do exist, but that was sort of the promise of new media. But unfortunately, I do think we're seeing a lot of it descend into slop, honestly, that rivals kind of the worst parts of old mainstream media. And in some cases, I would actually say is worse.
This actually relates to the next question that we have, and I'll give this one to you, Stephen. Stephen, Brad, do you support banning wire news associations like the AP from the White House press room and Air Force One when these organizations feed thousands of smaller news outlets?
Unless I'm missing something, I don't know why you would ban people that are doing original on-the-ground reporting. These things are pretty essential for us to actually have stuff to talk about. Almost all alternative media is going to be too underfunded to actually commit to on-the-ground reporting to gather original facts. So unless there's a recent thing I'm missing, I don't know why you would want to ban people like AP or Reuters from the newsroom.
I guess
definitely not.
This person is trying to get both of your input on the Trump administration's back and forth with the Associated Press over access to the White House. Also, the Trump administration trying to potentially change the way that the White House briefing room is set up. They've created a new chair for some of these alternative media outlets. Brad, did you want to comment?
Yeah, well, there's two different questions there. On the first one with the Associated Press, I've been very critical of the Trump administration's moves on that. And in fact, even a Trump-appointed federal judge blasted their move there as contravening the First Amendment, because what they're doing is attempting to basically punish the Associated Press for its refusal to adopt their preferred name. Forget preferred pronouns. We got preferred names now for the Gulf of America, is what the Trump administration now calls it, which was traditionally called the Gulf of Mexico. The Associated Press is not going along with that name change. And maybe you think that's stupid. Maybe you think that's obstinate. They should just do it. But it is their right as a free press organization to call it whatever they like. Yet the Trump administration is explicitly retaliating against them for it. So I don't support that, because I think about the shoe on the other foot, right? By that logic, the Biden administration could have banned Fox News from the briefing room because it wouldn't use the correct, in their view, pronouns for Admiral Rachel Levine or someone like that. I don't want the government punishing media outlets for their word choice. So I'm against that. I actually do support the initiative by the White House to bring in new media voices and add a seat alongside the traditional press outlets in the press briefing room. I think my disappointment has come with how those new media personalities are choosing to use that platform. But I think in and of itself, it's a great idea, because huge swaths of America no longer get their news from traditional media sources, so they shouldn't be the only ones represented in the press briefings.
Nathan is in Dallas, Texas, on our line for viewers under 35. Good morning, Nathan.
Hi, good morning. I was wondering, in the new climate we're moving into, where people maybe sort of want to reconnect more or build bridges, what would successful conversations look like in that space? And like, what kind of goals would we want to have in these conversations.
All right, Stephen, why don't you go first, then Brad?
I think at its best, alternative media could be providing a platform where you have people with different perspectives that have some kind of shared factual reality, where we get together and we have heated arguments or discussions on how best to achieve some common end. I really do believe, even as divided as we are today, that everybody kind of wants the same things in life. I think that, again, at its best, alternative media could be hosting a passionate discussion between two people about what it looks like to, say, support Ukraine or to support Israel in their foreign conflicts. Instead, it seems like we're endlessly focused on weird conspiracy theories or misinformation about, what our support even currently looks like or the facts on the ground at all. So instead of having these discussions that are contributing towards building a better understanding of the other side and kind of building towards some moderated opinion on how to move the entire country forward, instead we're all endlessly arguing over how many Nazis are in the Azov battalion, how many biolabs exist that are creating viruses for Russians, or how many hundreds of billions of dollars of cash, actual cash have we sent to Ukraine. It's just like, it's gotten really ridiculous, I think. Yeah.
Brad?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I absolutely agree. You got to try to find mutual factual ground that you can start from. But I also think it's really important that we avoid the lure of radical polarization and tribalism, especially in the independent media space, because it does reward you in the ecosystem, but you're never going to have any true sort of cross-partisan or cross-ideological dialogue when you are dehumanizing and vilifying the other side constantly. So I'm not perfect, but I try to avoid personal insult or ad hominems towards people. I'm sure I don't always uphold to that rule. And then look, I'm really alarmed by what I see as a rise in political extremism to the point of outright support for violence. You, of course, do have this on the far right, but I particularly am observing this with the young progressive left. You have an entire online cultish movement for Free Luigi, where they openly support somebody who is seriously accused of openly assassinating someone and killing them in cold blood. A father, who wasn't accused of any crime, had no trial, just executed. And you have huge swaths of people on the internet who support that. Meanwhile, you have public polling showing people, the Network Contagion Institute with Rutgers University polled left of center Americans and found that a majority, at least somewhat, approve of the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. This is a really dark time, whether it's people vandalizing their neighbors' Teslas to make some sort of stupid political point or openly supporting political violence. And unfortunately, this is where I do think political commentators have to take responsibility for their role in this. And I have to call out Stephen a little bit here because I've appreciated a lot of his commentary. He's definitely a sharp guy, but he made fun of the dude who got shot at Trump's attempted assassination and died. He was on TV and refused to condemn the assassination. I think when you have a platform this big in such a boiling hot country politically, we've got to take the temperature down and stop, even if you think the other side does it, stop, flirting with or playing footsie with political violence. It's a sickness that could tear this country apart.
Stephen, I imagine you'd like to respond.
Yeah, there's a lot that I could say on this topic. Funnily enough, I think Brad might actually agree with me on most of it. He just disagrees on the prescription. One of the things that I stress to people is in a political system, there is no virtue for taking the high road. If anything, I would argue that there is an immorality attached to it. At the end of the day, politics is the practice of power over other people. At least in a democracy, you're trying to gain some political influence to move your country towards some policies that you approve of. And if you're not doing that, you're necessarily ceding ground because to some extent, politics is a zero-sum game. For every election winner, there is an election loser. I think that one of the huge issues is I think conservatives have become completely and totally deranged and unhinged with how they approach the media environment. I think that conservatives think that they can say or do literally anything and just, enjoy it and reap all of the entertainment rewards and everything that come from it. But then when anything happens to them, they immediately want to go to the other side and say, you guys need to apologize for this. You guys need to feel bad for this. I think a really great example, unfortunately for Brad, is over the past couple days, we've seen this. I don't want to say all four numbers in a row because I don't know if the Secret Service is going to visit me as well. But it's the number below 87, and it's the number that refers to the what number President Trump is having right now in office. for conservatives who, Trump tweeted out the video of Biden tied up in the back of the truck. We've seen them say 86, whatever, people like over. You've seen tweets pop up from Jack Posobiec for this. You've seen tweets pop up from Matt Gaetz for this. That all of a sudden now when the Democrats do it, all of the Republicans are like, you need to stop this. You need to apologize. These are calling for an assassination of the president. I think that world is ridiculous. I do take a pretty hyperbolic stance. I don't think anybody should be getting killed for political purposes in the United States. I think that's way over the line, but I absolutely will not acquiesce to conservatives that want to pearl clutch over it when I think that we are exactly in this environment because of exactly the type of behavior they exhibit. And I'd rather be a bit unhinged about it and force the conversation than to get on my knees and beg for forgiveness because a registered Republican, tried to kill the president.
Just because many folks may not be as quite online as you are, could you explain a little bit more about this 87 trend that you're talking about? The prior director of the FBI, James Comey, took a picture of some seashells on the seashore, and they spelled out 8647. And people are interpreting this as to 86 something apparently now means you have to murder something. And so people were saying that when Comey put this on his Instagram page that he was calling for the assassination of the current president. I think Tulsi Gabbard and others have made incredibly strong statements saying he needs to be jailed or, investigated and then jailed for what was obviously a call to assassinate the president. Here's a story, excuse me, on NPR about that James Comey is under investigation for his 8647 Instagram post. What does it mean? And the Trump administration is investigating former FBI Director James Comey over a social media post that some government officials and supporters of President Trump are interpreting as a threat to the president. On Thursday, Comey shared a picture on Instagram of seashells on a beach arranged in the numbers 8647. The caption read, "Cool shell formation on my beach walk." 86 is a slang term that means get rid of, and Trump is the 47th and 45th president of the United States. According to Merriam-Webster, the most common meaning of 86, which has its roots in the service industry, is to throw out or refuse service to a customer. The dictionary notes the term has also come to mean kill, but the dictionary says it does not include this meaning in the official entry due to its relative recency and sparseness of use. So let's get back to calls. Lou is in Buffalo, New York, on our line for Independence. Good morning, Lou.
Yes, hi, good morning. First off, in the restaurant industry, 86 means we are out of. But anywho, my question was about the young voters. And I know I had heard there was a push to drop the voting age. And I was just wondering what the guests' opinion were on either dropping the voter age, keeping it the same, or even raising it up to 21. Go Bills.
All right. Brad, then Stephen.
Yeah, look, I think we need some consistency in this country, so I'm actually not against the idea of raising the age of legal adulthood to 21 and then making everything 21. What I do have a problem with is this weird piecemeal approach that we have in our current legal and political system where you got to be 18 to do some things and you're considered an adult and you can vote, but you still can't do a bunch of other things that are, if anything, a lot less severe than some of the things you can do at 18. I think with what we know about brain development, with how college has kind of, whether you like it or not, turned into an extended adolescence for a lot of young people. There's an argument to say raise everything to 21, but I wouldn't support lowering it below 18. I mean, you're 16, look at the things 16-year-olds say and do and believe and tell me they should be voting. But they're also just not full-fledged adults or independents really at any point, but neither are a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds. So I do understand the point. I think you got to either keep it where it is or move everything to 21, and we're going to decide that's the new age of legal adulthood. I just don't understand how we can continue with this bizarre piecemeal approach.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think consistency is good. I think for the most part, we recognize 18 years old as being the age of majority in the United States, so we should probably keep the voting age around there. If people want to raise it even more, I'm okay with that, as long as we lower the voting cap age as well. If you're no longer cognitive enough to maintain, say, a driver's license, then you shouldn't be voting. I'm joking when I say that, but I think 18 is a good age to keep the voting age at.
John,
I think we also need a maximum age on the presidency stat.
Sure,
John.
that age is going to be whatever
amendment.
your president is, plus, not you personally, but everybody will have different opinions about that, but yeah.
John is in Michigan on our line for folks under 35. Good morning, John.
Hey, good morning. Yep, I'm 30 years old, and I feel like the format of online YouTube podcast thing, really not even that new to me. It seems like maybe it came into its heyday about 4 years ago, but the format's been around for quite a while. And, you know, I'm vaguely familiar with these two guests. I've seen Brad on maybe the Brianna Joy Gray show, and Destiny, I've just seen him debating different people, and you know, I'm of the view that these two gentlemen, they're what I would
Sorry,
refer
John,
to
I'm just
as
going to pause you
mainstream.
for a moment to explain why you referred to Stephen as Destiny as a gaming term, your gaming name, right?
Yeah, that's where it came from, yeah. It's just
Okay.
in the name of my channel now, yeah.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I mean, I view these two gentlemen, I'm sorry to say, as mainstream alternative media, which is they're doing pretty much the same thing as the New York Times, CNN, Fox News, which is pushing people towards a partisan narrative. And really the real alternative media is post-partisan in a sense. And Destiny says he's far left, for example. I mean, if he's supporting NATO in the Ukraine war, I mean, there's nothing far left about that. So you missed the mark, C-SPAN.
All right, well, Stephen, I'll let you respond first then.
It's very difficult to draw kind of where the political compass is these days. I guess we have a very one-dimensional view of things that maybe you think you can do it on foreign policy. But I mean, as we've seen over the past several years, it seems like the Democrats have definitely leaned more towards the supporting Ukraine position, and the Republicans, for a whole list of reasons, have leaned away from it. I don't think you can very cleanly draw your political views based on something as simple as are you pro or anti-NATO anymore. I think there are other kind of paradigms you can draw. I guess where you'd fall on the political map. There are other issues that you would draw that around. I will say that one of the big mistakes that the caller made is he seems to think that alternative media can be post-partisan, or that there's some post-partisan media that he consumes. I guarantee you that that caller consumes media that is basically identical to other forms of media that he consumes, where it's not actually post-partisan, it's just anti-establishment. And because the anti-establishment narratives tends to draw people in who were traditionally left, or who were traditionally or who were traditionally on the right. So for instance, people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, and then people on the right, any of the current, I guess, like Trump people, because they get this kind of like mix of people. They think they're in a post-partisan world, but when you start asking questions about the establishment, all of a sudden, all of them have the exact same point of view.
And then, Brad, what do you think of being referenced as part of the mainstream alternative media?
I mean, I'm not sure I take that as an insult. I guess calling me partisan, I guess you can think that. I'm sure you must not tune in too regularly to my content. I criticize Republicans all the time. I kind of think that both mainstream parties and their representatives are a joke at this point in American politics. But I guess honestly, sometimes people accuse me of being establishment or mainstream as a pejorative. And I just tell you the truth. Like, I just give you my opinion. And if that opinion aligns with the establishment, okay. If I think it's true, I'm still going to say so. If I think it's correct, I'm still going to say so. The idea that you would always be against anything the establishment believes is equally as partisan and tribal and, you know, illogical as saying I'm always going to just believe anything the establishment tells me. So I do find there is kind of, obviously, there are people who are just biased towards the establishment, want to just believe everything they're told by the people they trust. Then there's also sort of an anti-establishmentarian form of brain rot where, therefore, everything the government says is true must be false. Therefore, everything mainstream media reports must be fake. In fact, a lot of it is correct and is true, and it just requires like discernment and integrity and honesty to wade through it and try to accurately assess what's true and what's not, what's right and what's wrong. And that's all I try to do. I'm sure I don't always get it right, but I'm definitely not doing it purposefully in service of some side or some party. I mean, if it is, I'm doing a terrible job of it because I've tried repeatedly to get the Trump administration to give me any sort of access or invite me to the influencer briefings or anything like that, and thus far have gotten the cold shoulder. So if I'm doing PR for them, they're clearly not pleased with the job that I'm doing.
Justin is in Pensacola, Florida, also on our line for folks under 35. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning. Lots to talk about, lots to get into. I just wanted to say to both of the guests, what's your view on the online media, the independent media, whatever you want to call it, new media? Seems like both the left and the right are both kind of fighting back against Israel and the so-called JQ and the control of our government. It seems like both the left and the right, the extreme fringes, maybe you want to say, are kind of uniting. And where do you see that going?
Brad, why don't you go first?
Well, I actually don't know what is meant by JQ. It gives me a little bit of pause to guess what that might mean.
Justin, do you want to
Uh,
explain?
Jewish question.
Okay. Well,
yeah. So I think that kind of I'm pretty uncomfortable with anything framed that way. I think obviously there's declining support for Israel on both sides of the American public, and to the extent that the establishment continues to support Israel, I think that's a reflection not of foreign control of our government or anything like that, but of the fact that they have the muscle memory, particularly the GOP, of being pro-Israel for decades, and that the hardcore base, the evangelical Christians, are still very much with Israel. So, look, public opinion shifts over time. Politics eventually catches up, but it takes time. So, if Israel continues to kind of lose support among the public, eventually politicians will change, no matter how many donations are made in either direction. Money can't actually buy politics in the long run. We've seen people like Michael Bloomberg burn millions and millions of dollars trying to prove otherwise. So if people are not satisfied that our current political class is reflecting the people's views on this issue, you got to give it a little bit of time for that to play out.
Stephen, did you want to comment on what the caller said?
Yeah, I actually think this is largely a demographic question. I think that for historical reasons, basically the entire older population in the United States is very pro-Israel. I think that the memories that older people in the United States have of Israel are pretty fond ones. It's, this thriving nation in the Middle East that's one of the only democracies that's fighting against all the other Arab states, and their story is a pretty inspiring one. I think that if you've grown up as a millennial, especially a younger millennial, or in a younger generation, your view of Israel is this is a huge country with a powerful military supported by the most powerful country in the world that seems to use all of their military to exclusively bully Palestinians. That's like your perspective on it. So I think that from that perspective, it's not surprising that when you look at the mainstream media, you tend to get pro-Israel support from basically everywhere. And then when you go to the alternative media, where the audience skews much younger, you find really harsh criticisms of our support for Israel on both sides, on the left and the right, because you don't have that same older attachment to it. And it's very easy from the left to criticize Israel on humanitarian grounds, on stuff related to the current claims of apartheidness and genocideness and everything else. And then from the right, it's very easy to criticize them on the grounds of, a foreign nation that has too much influence over U.S. foreign policy and this new conservative desire to be isolationist and everything as well.
Eric is in New Brunswick, New Jersey, on our line for folks under 35. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Hi, thank you. I will be slightly over the age of 35 in the next presidential election in 2028, and I'm just amazed that the Democrats have not taken on the issue of getting rid of the drug war. Obama had the House, the Senate, and the presidency to the Democrats his first term, and he still kept it illegal to treat, say, Parkinson's with marijuana. And if you've ever seen how marijuana can help someone who has serious symptoms of Parkinson's, it's just despicable that the federal government would keep that illegal. So my question is, in the age of social media, are you not surprised that no one has challenged the Democrats? Because at this point, it's pretty embarrassing that the Democrats have not gotten rid of the drug war in any way, shape, or form. Still, even marijuana is illegal for even treatment of Parkinson's and cancer, nausea with chemotherapy. So in the 2028 election, will there be a mandate for the presidential nominee for the Democrats to be against the war on drugs, especially given the, Democrats are all pro-choice for reproductive rights? What about your choice, using with a doctor?
I think we get the idea of your question. Stephen, why don't you take that one?
Unfortunately, I'm going to give the same answer kind of as the last one. I think this is a very boring demographics question. I agree 100 million% with the caller, but just because most Americans that vote skew older, and most older people have probably more negative views of drugs, even drugs like marijuana, than younger people, you just tend to see a lot less support for it and a lot less focus from politicians on that particular issue.
Let's hear from Bilal in New York, also on our line for folks under 35. Good morning, Bilal.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Big fan. Hi, Destiny. I just wanted to say, how do you guys deal with the double standards that the Republican Party does and how they get away with it from the Republican Party, and what we can do to combat that. And just shut up. Easy chat.
Brad, do you want to go ahead with that one?
Yeah, I guess and this is where Destiny or Stephen and I differ. I don't concern myself with the fact that other people have double standards. I try to hold myself to my own personal standards. So just because the other side does something, I don't respond by doing it in kind. I actually consider that to be kind of a morally broken logic. I mean, if I was fighting a war and the other side was, sexually assaulting civilians, I wouldn't ever say, well, I guess we should do that too. But unfortunately, when it comes to, extreme rhetoric or name calling or bullying or corruption or greed, there is a line of thought in politics or support for political violence where some people say, we got to do that to the other side harder because they're doing it to us. At the end of the day, I would rather lose the debate than debase myself or become something I don't recognize or can't countenance in order to win it. So I just don't really concern myself with other people's double standards other than to call them out for it, but I'm not going to ever use it as justification to engage in the same kind of behavior because fundamentally, I mean, two wrongs don't make a right.
Jeff is in Crofton, Nebraska on our line for Republicans. Good morning, Jeff.
Hey, guys, I'm 68, retired from the Marine Corps, hardcore conservative, news junkie. But I got to tell you, if there's anybody out there that thinks that the Democrats and the politicians, the media, did not come together as one unit and screw this country up, not only with all their lies, but they were all in one. And I really do think that they need to change the news media in the White House with maybe Joe Rogan's representatives, your representatives, Megyn Kelly representatives, and get rid of ABC, NBC, MSNBC, Fox, all of them, and change the whole scenario, because we're not getting the truth out of the mainstream media. And again, I'm a conservative. I watched Fox. I seen all the lies. And the thing that Biden, what they did with Biden in this big cover-up, if they don't do an investigation and do like the Democrats say now, oh, we're going to move forward. Well, of course they are, because they're the one telling the lies. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to happen again.
All right, well, let's let both of our guests respond. Stephen first.
I hope that we can vote to expand mental health care in the VA. It sounds like that caller definitely needs some mental assistance. Unfortunately,
that wasn't very kind, Stephen.
It wasn't very kind, but excuse me, I'm sorry, but the fact that there are people in this country who are teaching their children or grandchildren that the 2020 election was rigged, or that there was some massive conglomerate of politicians, media, and Democrats that came together to hide something from the American people, when Donald Trump is literally launching unprecedented attacks against law firms in the form of targeted executive orders, is investigating political rivals, has expressed disappointment that he can't go after people who are on the J6 committee. I could run this list down infinitely. The $400 million plane from Qatar. No, I'm sorry. I am tired of feeding into this delusion that both sides have issues and that both sides are exactly the same on this topic. I think there is a very unique form of brain rot that has unfortunately corroded a large amount of the MAGA base. I mean, Brad here, you are a never Trumper Republican. I'm sure you've probably seen this maybe even more than I have. I think that there is a very scary world we live in right now where alternative media, unfortunately, I guess kind of the subject of the show, has fed into these kind of delusional narratives and have pushed them further along than they would be otherwise. You even saw Fox News try this, for instance, with the Dominion lawsuit. Not sure if the last caller was aware of it or not, but all of Fox News colluded, and we can see it in all of their recorded conversations, to push false narratives about Dominion voting machines stealing the 2020 election. And they knowingly pushed those false narratives. It's the reason why it was the largest corporate defamation payout in all time in all of U.S. history. But nobody on the older conservative side seems to be aware of or cares about that.
But Stephen, do you not believe that people lied and covered up for Biden's cognitive decline in mainstream media and in Democratic politics? You don't think they did that?
I think that there are people that probably got it wrong, and there might have been people who have seen what they wanted to see, which I'm sure I'm sure people do this. But the idea that there was I'm sorry, let me pose a question back to you. Do you think that there was a top-down collusion between all of the media, politicians, and all of the Democrats to lie about Biden's cognitive health, but they still let him go on and do a debate?
I don't think there was any sort of like grand organized conspiracy, but I think when you look at like MSNBC hosts like Joe Scarborough going out there and saying he's the sharpest he's ever been in my private meetings with him, when you look at mainstream media inventing a new term called cheap fakes for real videos of Joe Biden, and when you look at the things that Kamala Harris and others said about the Robert Hur recording, when it was obviously true and correct, but they slandered this man for allegations that were proved true about Biden's mental decline. I think clearly people were incredibly dishonest and did cover this up. There was a huge book that just was released by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson about this very cover up. There doesn't have to be like some meeting where they all come together for there to be essentially a narrative that people start to espouse and just partisan loyalty that infects people, and they want to make the administration look good. So no, there's not like
two things on that real quick.
Hats.
Two things. One, the caller was saying that there was a top-down narrative that was being controlled by a singular source. That was the claim.
Yeah, well, I don't believe that, to be clear.
So I'm going to stop you guys there because I do want to get to a couple more callers before we have to end the segment. Marion is in Grovetown, Georgia, on our line for Democrats. Go ahead, Marion. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, first, I just want to say about Trump's wanting to get that $400 million airplane. We furnish our employee, which is Trump, a plane for an office in the sky. He does not need a palace in the sky. But what I want to read is something about the emoluments. It says, and then I'm reading, in 1785, Louis
So, Marion, I'm
XVI,
going to have to ask you to be pretty quick about it because we're almost out of time.
Oh, okay. He presented Benjamin Franklin a snuff box encrusted with diamonds and set with his portrait. Americans believed it threatened to corrupt Franklin in altering his attitude towards the French in subtle and psychological ways. In 2010...
So you're worried about the emoluments clause and this gift from Qatar, but what's your question for our guests? Because we're just about out of time.
What happened was that the Americans that's when the emoluments clause began, because the Americans said, whoa, no, we don't. This is a gift that could alter the way he views the French. So, in other words, now we're talking about a $400 million plane, gifts from other countries. This is a corruption on another level, and we need to fix it. That's all. Thank you.
Well, I'll let you both respond to Marion's point, and that'll be it for our segment. Go ahead. Stephen, why don't you go first?
I mean, obviously, I would say the current administration is completely and wholly morally bankrupt when it comes to actually adhering to any kind of principled governance or rule of law. I mean, this acceptance of a plane is just one domino in a line of many that have fallen when it comes to kind of an unprecedented abuse of the office. Some of the worst, I mean, I've already mentioned the targeting of particular law firms or people with executive orders that Trump doesn't like. The entire launch of the Trump crypto coin, where Trump launched a digital online currency that people could throw money into for him to personally benefit from in ways that are completely obscured from the American public. It's a tragedy, but I mean, it feels like he can do basically anything at this point, and the entire Republican apparatus won't call him out for it because they're too scared of losing the support that he's garnered from the party.
Brad?
Yeah, look, he absolutely shouldn't be accepting foreign gifts from Qatar, which is a state sponsor of terrorism, and him hawking the meme coin, I think, is a disgrace. I think their corruption is obvious, but I think we should also reckon with like how bad do Democrats have to be that people chose this instead? I mean, he was pretty open about everything he was going to do. I don't know. I think politicians are corrupt, but it is very blatant, some of the things this administration is doing, and I absolutely will not defend it.
Well, thank you to you both. Brad Polumbo is a social media and political commentator calling in from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Stephen Bonnell, also another social media political commentator. Thank you both very much for joining us on our show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And coming up at 9:15 a.m. Eastern on Washington Journal, we'll have attorney Alan Dershowitz joining us to talk about legal and constitutional issues in the news, along with his new book, The Preventative State. But first, it is open forum. You can start calling in now. Our number for Democrats, 202-748-8000, Republicans, 202-748-8001, and Independents, 202-748-8002. We'll be right back.
Tonight on C-SPAN's Q&A, former Republican California Congressman Christopher Cox, author of Woodrow Wilson, The Light Withdrawn, takes a critical look at the 28th President of the United States and his attitudes toward racial equality and women's suffrage.
The battle, which had been going on for decades and decades for women getting the vote, had reached a tipping point, because that's when he shows up on the scene. And really, if you think of it like volleyball or basketball, the ball was right there to be slammed. And that's all he would have had to do as a leader of the country at that time, because society had changed so much. This is the 20th century. We've got women in the workplace. We've got technology that makes it possible for home industry to be offloaded to Sears Roebuck and Piggly Wiggly grocery stores and so on. The country was ready for this, and it got delayed for almost the entirety of Wilson's 2 terms.
Christopher Cox with his book, Woodrow Wilson, tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can listen to Q&A and all of our podcasts on the C-SPAN Now app or wherever you get your podcasts.
There are many ways to listen to C-SPAN radio, anytime, anywhere. In the Washington, D.C. area, listen on 90.1 FM. Use our free C-SPAN Now app, or go online to cspan.org/radio. On SiriusXM radio on channel 455, the TuneIn app, and on your smart speaker by simply saying, play C-SPAN radio. Hear our live call-in program, Washington Journal, daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Listen to House and Senate proceedings, committee hearings, news conferences, and other public affairs events live throughout the day. And for the best way to hear what's happening in Washington with fast-paced reports, live interviews, and analysis of the day, catch Washington Today, weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Listen to C-SPAN programs on C-SPAN radio, anytime, anywhere. C-SPAN, democracy unfiltered.
Washington Journal continues.